Hello and welcome to Unstuck by Nicole. A little perspective in your pocket to help you think differently, lead differently, and hopefully get unstuck from whatever is keeping you where you are. Today I'd like to challenge a phrase I've questioned for years. Let's break the ice. When I first started working in training and human performance, clients would ask me the same question over and over again. Nicole, we've got a team meeting next week. Can you recommend a good icebreaker? And every single time, something about that question made me feel uncomfortable. Not because I disliked activities. I actually think the right activity at the right time can create wonderful conversations. It was the phrase itself. And at the time, I couldn't explain why. I just knew something didn't quite sit right. Years later, while studying neuro-linguistic programming, my trainer casually said something that completely changed how I thought about those words. He simply said, "The phrase break the ice suggests there is ice to be broken." I remember thinking, oh my goodness, of course it does. I'd never looked at it like that before. And from that moment on, I stopped trying to break the ice and I started trying to create connection. What's funny is once I'd heard that, my mind immediately went back to something that had happened years earlier. In my 20s, I had travelled around the world on my own. And one of the first things I did was join a month-long group tour through Southeast Asia. I arrived knowing absolutely nobody. We were all complete strangers in different countries with different backgrounds. And if there was ever a situation where somebody might have suggested an icebreaker, surely this was it. But nobody did. Instead, we simply started talking. We asked questions, we laughed, we shared experiences, and somewhere along the way, strangers became really, really good friends. And 15 years later, many of those people are still some of my closest friends. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we'll all be travelling from different parts of the world to meet each other again. And when I look back now, I don't think what stayed with me was how quickly we connected. It's that nobody ever tried to manufacture it. After that NLP course, I couldn't stop noticing it. Every workshop, every conference, every leadership program I attended, somebody would eventually say, let's start with an icebreaker. And before anything had even happened, people's bodies had already responded. Some started to look down, others laughed nervously, some immediately started rehearsing what they were going to say. The activity hadn't actually created the discomfort, it was the expectation that had. One experience that stayed with me ever since was when a facilitator asked everybody attending a training session to bring an object that represented who they were. The intention was genuinely lovely, but before the session had even started, people were already saying, "Oh, I think mine's really rubbish. I don't like what I've actually chosen. What did you bring with you?" The discomfort hadn't begun in the room, it actually began the moment they received the email. And that was a huge lesson. As leaders, facilitators, coaches, parents, or simply as human beings, we influence how people feel long before we ever begin the conversation. Over the years, I stopped asking, what is a good icebreaker? And I started asking a different question. And that is, how do I help people feel safe enough to connect? They're very different questions, and one focuses on the activity, the other focuses on the human. And in my experience, when you focus on the human, connection usually takes care of itself. Because people rarely connect because they're told to. They connect through shared experiences, curiosity, gentle vulnerability, feeling heard, and feeling understood. I've also noticed that when we genuinely want to get to know someone, we rarely say, should we go and break the ice? We usually say, fancy grabbing a coffee? Have you ever stopped to think about that? There's no agenda, no performance, no pressure, just two people creating space for a conversation, and perhaps that's the actual point. Maybe meaningful connection has never been about breaking anything. Maybe it's simply about creating an environment where people feel safe enough to be themselves. This week, I'd love you to notice something. Notice how often you hear the phrase, let's break the ice. And if you hear it, let's not judge it. Just become curious and perhaps ask, what if there isn't any ice to break? What if my role isn't to create the connection, but simply create the conditions where connection can naturally happen? Sometimes the smallest shift in language creates the biggest shift in how people feel. Thank you for spending this time with me. If today's conversation got you thinking and you're someone who enjoys reading, you'll find this perspective as a journal on my website. If someone came to mind while you were listening today, and perhaps they need to hear this, if it feels right, I'd love for you to share it with them. Until next time, keep a little perspective in your pocket.